Hello everyone, this is Mwelwa, your host for this particular special episode in our energy series. With me is a player in the energy sector, Prince Nyati, who is the Chief Development Officer at Serenje Energy. He's going to be sitting down with me to tell me a little bit about some of the work that him and his company have been doing at the project that they have in M-Phase, as well as other sites in Zambia and across Africa. But then also, we'll talk about pertinent issues that are affecting the energy space. Prince, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Mwelwa. Thank you.
All right, and thank you so much for joining us on this special episode. But before we get started, a lot of people maybe might not know you. We do understand that you are a developer of an IPP, but just tell us a little bit about yourself as well as the project that you represent.
Thank you, Mwelwa. Thank you for having me on the show. So my name is Prince Nyati. I am from Zambia, and I'm a power developer. I work with a company called Serenje Energy, based out of Johannesburg. And I am the Chief Development Officer, and I head up all origination and development of new projects. Now, as a company, we are developing a pipeline of projects in Southern Africa, particularly our emphasis is in the SADC region, but we will look outside. And our two most advanced projects are in Zambia. We've got two projects there. One in Lusaka, 25 megawatts, called Lusanje, and 100 megawatt on the cobalt called CVBP Solar. Now, these are utility scale projects. Obviously, they are large scale. But apart from the two projects that we have in Zambia, our pipeline includes projects in Namibia, and through a related company in Madagascar, some legacy projects that we have recently acquired. And then also in South Africa, we are looking at what we call the CNI space. CNI space is commercial and industrial space. So in South Africa, we're currently not playing in the utility space because we feel it's a bit crowded and saturated. However, we are playing in the commercial and industrial space where we do anything from rooftop solar to obviously dedicated captive power solutions. These are usually in the form of solar hybrids. And we currently are developing projects in the Western Cape in partnership with some private equity, as well as a dedicated mining project in the KwaZulu-Natal in an economic zone. Right. So that is about who we are.
Okay.
And really, our company is dedicated to we are committed to becoming the largest IPP in Africa in the next 10 years. And we want to grow our generation capacity from where it currently is right now to anywhere around 10,000 megawatts. And I do believe that is achievable. And one of the things that I'd like to add is that we take the initial risk on projects and we fund them ourselves using funds that we get from our investors. And once they are sufficiently developed, then we bring them for financing from either banks or private equity or pension funds and so on and so forth, financial partners. So that really is our role, is to originate, develop, and obviously de-risk.
You've obviously touched on a very, very interesting aspect on energy players, which is independent power producers.
Yes.
Are you able to explain to us what their role is in energy security? Because I think for many people, they believe that energy should be coming from state-owned utilities.
Yes. So I think that is probably a legacy issue, that perception that the state should provide electricity to its citizens. I think as time goes by, African countries are starting to realize that the role of the state is not to actually provide electricity itself. I think it's to create an enabling environment and also to facilitate the provision of electricity. I think you can see this in sectors such as education. I think from the early 90s, there was sort of a decentralization and almost, for lack of a better term, a privatization or at least the environment, the sector changed in such a way that there were independent providers of education that were allowed. Private schools, were not just limited to 2 or 3. It actually became quite open. It was decentralized. The curriculum was opened up, and so on and so forth. And that's what I believe is going to be the situation in the next 5, hopefully 10 years in Zambia. I think 5 years is a bit of a stretch, but I think we're getting there. I think in the next decade or so, we should have more participation of IPPs providing electricity. Now, the importance of having IPPs providing electricity in a country is it actually allows the demand and supply and also fair competition to come into play. And what this does is, as the sector develops, the economics start to kick in, economies of scale start to kick in, and you find that the price actually starts to sort of align with the market. And you also take away inefficiencies. Right. Because in as much as the state utility provides very low tariffs, you find that they actually subsidized by the state. And as you bring in IPPs that are competing to provide electricity at a cost-reflective tariff, of course, yes. You find that there's no need for the state to start subsidizing so much, electricity. And those funds can actually be allocated elsewhere. So again, just to iterate, the IPP's role is to bring in efficiency, fair competition, and also just to take away the biggest challenge that the government faces in running state utilities, which is that of outlaying capital. As you know, in 2020, Zambia reached its pretty much its limit. They ended up defaulting on all their IPP commitments. And even as we're speaking now, 4 years later, that mark is still sits there, and which makes it even difficult for IPPs like ourselves to raise funding. And maybe just on the matter of funding, if I can just sort of put a pin on that. I know that you mentioned you asked me what the key components are. I deliberately did not speak to finance because the assumption at that point was that the IPP would bring the funding. Right. But actually the funding is a very, very critical component, a very, very critical consideration when it comes to developing power. Because you can have all the other key components, but if you don't have the funding, that project is not going anywhere. Right. And even in the most difficult circumstances, when the funding is readily available, it makes developing a project much easier. So the financing component for us, and the challenge we're currently facing now, is that Zambia is considered a high-risk credit jurisdiction, not just even for private projects. So when you talk to DFIs, they'll tell you, well, Zambia defaulted in 2020, and even if you're selling power to private off-takers, we're going to need extra security to be in place. We need extra measures that wouldn't ordinarily be required in the past. But because of the country risk, you find that even the pricing is too high. Right. So what the DFIs are doing, and not all of them, but what some of them are doing is that you find that they actually put a very high country risk premium in your pricing. Right. This is just to avoid, it's a way of sort of telling you to look elsewhere because they do not want to lend into a high risk country. So finance is quite important. Yeah. And as IPPs, we actually in a much better position to source funding than the utility, at least under the current circumstances, because the utility will require guarantee from the sovereign, which at this point doesn't have a very good credit rating. Right. Yeah. Right. So as IPPs, we are bringing in funding, and by bringing in better priced funding where we can get it. And then just to qualify what I said earlier, it's not everybody that is averse to lending into Zambia. Once the correct guarantees or security instruments are in place, you'll find that the lenders will provide the funding,
Right.
and the private lenders are actually quite efficient, and they move very quickly. Their decision making and internal governance processes are much quicker than the DFIs. So you find that you're able to bring in that pricing, and when you get the lower, the funding, and when you get that funding at a lower pricing or lower interest, you find that you also are able to pass that through in the tariffs.
Right, right. And,
So,
and then you've touched on a very, very interesting aspect, because I was now going to jump to the issue of tariffs.
Yes.
How is the current regulatory framework, as well as the impact of the funding, the cost of funding, how is that impacting things like the tariff allocation? And I know you've obviously had experience in South Africa,
Yes.
as well as Zambia with the projects that you actually.
For sure. So I think what I've realized, what I've noted since we started our projects. I mean, we've been developing some of our projects for the past 4 years, and what we've realized that the pricing, or rather the tariff, in as much as the current pricing regime right now, the current tariff regime in Zambia, is a bit more aligned with what the true costs of running a power project are. So if we were to use US cents, if we just park the current exchange rate, fluctuating exchange rate, if we just park that to the side, typically before the approval of the new tariff regime, the average tariff was about just under 4 US cents, which is not economical for a small to mid-size solar project, for instance. Let's take solar, for instance. Anything under 4 cents is not economical,
Right.
or you struggle to make the economics work.
Right.
Unless you get concession funding and so on and so forth, which you cannot get, which is very difficult to get as a private developer. However, we find that when we did our analysis, we found that the tariff is currently sitting around 6 cents or north of that. Even though what the utility is charging still sits below that, that would probably be for other reasons. I don't know, how they are managing that. But speaking as an independent, I think anything north of 6 US cents makes sense. And also, just to just so I'm not misquoted, the 6 to 7 cents is really sort of it's an indicator. It's a good sort of average tariff for most solar projects in this region. That is not to say you can't have a project coming in at a lower tariff, economical tariff, or higher. It all just depends on the cost of construction. As you can imagine, sometimes sites can vary. So you find that maybe the terrain is difficult, or maybe there is no connectivity, so therefore the IPP must invest, additional funds in transmission lines to connect to the grid. But then also sometimes you find that where the site conditions are favorable, and there's already existing infrastructure, therefore it helps to pull the cost of construction down. Now, with respect to what goes into a tariff, or what one needs to consider, really the biggest cost of any project, a power project, is the construction cost.
Right.
And typically this will go to the EPC cost. So EPC being engineering, procurement and construction. Right. Usually you get a contractor through a competitive bidding process. So you find that by doing that, you find that the pricing is quite consistent in the industry. They're actually benchmarks. And the pricing is, there's quite a lot of data out there of what it should cost you to build per megawatt, for instance. And then also things like the cost of components are very important. That's what drives that EPC price, per unit. That's what drives it up or down. Currently, we're experiencing reduced costs in the cost of solar panels. So that is also coming through in the EPC price. So the EPC price really is the most important cost, the biggest cost. In fact, the EPC will offer you a turnkey solution usually. So you pay them a certain amount of money and they give you a power plant to the spec that you prescribed.
Right.
And they provide the necessary warranties and so on and so forth.
Now, obviously, you're a promoter of a solar project, renewable projects.
Yes.
One of the things that is now becoming apparent in sub-Saharan Africa is, over-reliance on hydro is becoming quite risky.
Yes.
What are your views from your perspective on why it's important to diversify, and how do IPPs now come in to now help bridge the gap, especially with the current, energy deficits that we have, and what should the long-term, energy strategies be for countries within the region?
Yes. So that's a very good question, and one that is very pertinent for Zambia specifically. Obviously, as a country, you need reliable, affordable, and clean energy. That's very important. But that energy needs to be a base load. You need to have that power 24 hours a day, 365
Yeah, and please
days a
amplify
week.
on base load for our...
So base load basically means this power should be available at the same, it should basically be available 24 hours and 365. Yeah. So every day of the year, you cannot afford to have this power going off. I'll give you an example, hydro, for instance. When the dam levels are at the right level and just producing, that is base load power. It's running 24/7. Solar will run only when the sun is shining. Of course, there are interventions where you can add battery energy storage to prolong that and also to regulate that. Also on solar, you find that it's fluctuating depending on how much sunshine you're getting. So when the minute there is a cloud cover, that impacts your generation. So you need to, solar is not base load. But there are other forms of base load, like thermal plants,
Yes.
whether they are being supplied by coal or
like the
heavy
Mamba-
fuel
like
oil,
the Mamba plant,
like
yeah.
Mamba, for instance, heavy fuel oil. Obviously, there's a cost consideration, and obviously, in this time in this day and age now, there's also the consideration about carbon emissions. So we need to be cognizant of that. The over-reliance on hydro, as we've seen in recent years because of climate change, is actually that risk is getting larger by the day. So it's very important, in as much as we need base load, to make sure that we supplement that base load, which is produced by hydro specifically, with some other forms of energy. Now, hydro is a great source of generation because it's clean and it's fairly affordable. Well, it all depends on how economically you build your power plants.
Right.
I know of the most recent hydro generation in Zambia has come out at a very high cost in terms of tariff. But Zesco is able to absorb this by sort of spreading that cost across its portfolio and averaging it out. But that aside, you need to have other forms of power so that, because in the market, not everybody requires consistent power 24/7. But the mines, the heavy industry users, manufacturing, they need power. So once you bring in IPPs, and by the way, that is not to say that IPPs cannot construct hydros of their own. They can. But I think we just need to do it in a way that allows them to consistently produce power and maybe even have pumped storage if it makes economic sense to ensure that when the dam levels are low, they are able to pump that water back. But those are huge undertakings. And in certain instances, they're just not pragmatic. Maybe for smaller hydros, they are. Now, the thinking around bringing in more IPPs is that the IPPs will then take away the demand from the grid, or at least from the base load, from the hydro, the power that is being generated by hydro. They'll take that demand and shift it They'll allow those customers that don't require to be on the, to be supplied throughout. For instance, if you bring in, let's say the country is generating 3,000 megawatts from hydro, and you bring in another 3,000 megawatts of solar, or maybe 1,500. What that means is that you'll be able to, you relieve that capacity during the day. Those customers, half the customers will now be using daytime. For their daytime generation, they'll be relying on solar. Okay, and then if you add batteries to that, which does increase the cost, then you can actually prolong the generation for maybe 4 hours, so from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And then obviously, depending on how many batteries, you can even have 24/7, of solar generated power. But obviously, economics at some point stop to make sense. So that is the thinking. It's not so much to, solar is not here to, or the IPPs, using renewable is not here to replace hydro. You need that base load. But the benefit of bringing IPPs into the market is that you then ensure that the people that need the power, the sectors that need the power, that reliable power consistently are not interrupted. Because currently now, a 4-hour outage on a manufacturer or a processing plant that runs 24 hours a day is a 25% reduction in their production capacity. So to ensure that they push the volumes that they need to, they have to resort to diesel or other fossil fuels, backup generators, which are costing you 4 to 5 times what it costs you to generate solar, or what they normally pay. Then that impacts the economics, and therefore they just choose to reduce their production. And what does that mean? They produce less, they sell less. Either they increase the price in order to keep them, to keep their lights on, for lack of a better term, pardon the pun, or they start paying 25% less tax. It's that simple. So IPPs are quite important.
Obviously, on the subject of IPPs, and you've provided a very elaborate explanation of not only their role, the importance of their role, but the importance of obviously cost recovery for projects to be bankable. But then, doesn't that now require a comprehensive IPP policy? We know, for example, that the Energy Act of 2019 does have aspects in there that will ensure that IPPs are able to recover most of the costs. But how important is an IPP policy around
I think it's, so on the one hand, you need to have a robust IPP policy, one that's very comprehensive and clearly states one that's very elaborate and very, very, very clear. Let me just put it that way. It needs to be clear. That's simple. And there are so many templates. There are so many examples out there, starting from the most advanced, in Europe, even countries as near as South Africa have got a very clear IPP policy.
They've onboarded quite a number of IPPs, especially. Yes. So now maybe just to, sorry to divert, but then would that be a mechanism of dealing with the current situation?
Absolutely. And I'm not very familiar with the current IPP policy. I have seen some documents. Obviously I've read documents like the IRP, which I recently got my hands on, and they I think the framework is there. What's lacking, and this is just based on my experience, is that how that translates, what's written on paper, how that translates into the support that IPPs get from the regulator, from the government, and then also from the utility. I think that needs to actually what we require is probably maybe more than the policy itself. I think the policy is quite sufficient, but what we need more than that is to actually have a proper implementation team in place. I think there are fragments. They are spread out all over the place. I'll give you an example. It has taken us 4 years to develop, really 3 years. We started developing our projects in 2021. It has taken us 3 years to get to where we are. In my opinion, it should take development of a power project shouldn't take more than 6 months. The development process.
Okay.
For you, from the time you start to the time you get to all your documents ready to start engaging with lenders, it shouldn't take that long. It should not, but unfortunately it has. And so I think that is the one recommendation that I'd make.
Right. Now, maybe say on a final note, and you've touched on a very, very interesting point, which now drives me to my final question. When countries find themselves in the sort of energy deficits that we have due to the hydrological challenges, the options that are available on the table could also include, for example, emergency power in the medium to short term.
Yes.
But Zambia has had experiences with emergency power, which tends to be quite costly.
Yes.
Emergency power versus IPPs and efficient development. Obviously, it's a no-brainer in terms of where we should be heading. What are your views on that?
So, look, obviously, emergency power should just be used for emergencies. The problem is when it now becomes something that you keep going back to, then it means you're not learning from your past mistakes. And I think at this point in time, nobody in Zambia, from the highest level to even the man on the ground, should be naive and believe that hydro is going to meet all our future requirements. And I think one thing we need to keep note of is that the demand is actually growing. It's probably growing at, I don't know what percentage it's growing at, but it's growing. It's not stagnant.
Fueled by the mines, onboarding of the mines as well.
Exactly. And as the population is just growing, there's sort of almost an organic growth for demand. So in order to meet this demand, you cannot rely on your current fleet. You have to keep adding to your fleet. I think the government has recognized that the future fleet is going to come from future generation capacity. Well, let me not call it fleet. Future generation capacity is going to come from IPPs or at least triple Ps. At least that is a very good starting point. We'll have people crowding here. Mwelwa, you and I have been to the Africa Energy Forum many times. And the agenda doesn't change. Or Africa, we keep talking about the potential of Africa. I think it's time to realize that potential. We need to stop singing songs and actually get on the ground and do the work.
And there you've heard it. Prince Nyati has told us a little bit about the company that he represents and various issues in the energy sector. Prince, thank you so much for being on the show. And we look forward to hosting you in future. And by any chance, will you be attending Africa Energy Forum?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for making the time to hear about our projects. We appreciate the opportunity, and it's hopefully to spur some interest in the industry and in the country in general around what we're trying to do, and hopefully to inspire others to also come and join the sector so that we can have more IPPs playing in this space. Yes, of course, I will be at Africa Energy Forum. It's a very important year for us because we are getting ready to go into construction phase for the first project, the Lusanje project. So it's a very important time for us to showcase what we are doing as a company, and also more importantly, to showcase what the opportunity that Zambia presents.
Absolutely, absolutely. There you've heard it for yourselves. So stay tuned for more insights from the Energy series from Financial Insight and get to know.